4:09 finish mark. First, one explosion off to the right. Pedestrians, onlookers between a building and the police line. And then seconds later, less than 20 seconds, a second device detonates. There is bedlam. The race is stopped in midstream. The dead and injured were slowly triaged and transported. Here is the latest based on what we know of the toll. At least 2 people reported dead from today's Boston Marathon. At least 100 people have been treated for injuries thus far at 3 leading Boston area hospitals. Late today, from the briefing room in the West Wing, we heard from President Obama. We don't have the president's comments quite yet.
Single federal resource necessary to care for the victims and counsel the families. And above all, I made clear to them that all Americans stand with the people of Boston.
We did, in fact, have the president's comments from the briefing room. That was within the last half hour. It has been an extraordinary day. Not all initial reports turned out to be true, but the initial fears did. And that was that this was not one but 2 devices apparently placed there to do harm. We have our look at this day so far from NBC's Ann Thompson.
Steps away from their ultimate goal, the unthinkable. Marathon runners and spectators violently injured. 2 explosions going off within seconds of each other at Boston's Copley Square.
At first it almost sounded like a cannon blast, but it felt so strong it literally almost blew my hat off. And everybody started running the other way. There were a few people that were running over towards them to help out the injured, and there were some really bad injuries. Some people were very, very badly hurt.
The clock at the finish line read 4 hours, 9 minutes, 43 seconds when the first explosion went off on Boylston Street. The second a block away. A place of celebration instantly transformed into a scene of chaos.
Everything was normal. Everyone was relaxed and happy. Then an explosion right next to the finish line. And then within another, maybe 30 seconds, another explosion. And then pandemonium struck.
Now there was a race of a different kind to rescue people and save them.
I was carrying somebody who lost both of the legs in the explosion. It was a lot of them were lost limbs, catastrophic.
The smoke could be seen from across the Charles River. Boston police called in all off-duty officers to help. Ambulances took 19 victims to Massachusetts General Hospital.
This is like a bomb explosion that we hear about in the news in Baghdad or Israel or some other tragic space in the world.
And it was carnage. It was just carnage. I actually saw a man who lost part of his leg. And then all the folks from the Marathon tent that were treating the runners obviously had to get called into action.
Some 27,000 runners from 96 countries signed up for the 26.2-mile race from Hopkinton to Copley Square. Those still on the course after the explosions were diverted away from the finish line. Authorities would not speculate on whether this was terrorism.
We're not being definitive on this right now, but you can reach your own conclusions based upon what happened.
The race famous for Heartbreak Hill, today the site of just heartbreak. Tonight, every police agency in the state of Massachusetts is sending help to Boston, as is the federal government. Bostonians are being told to stay indoors, and if they have to go out, to avoid large crowds, while authorities try to figure out who brought to such a violent, deadly end the day that people in Boston, Brian, have always called the very best day.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ann, for that. And about this day in Boston, let's go to Katie Tur, who's made her way up there. Katie, as I understand it, there's 15 blocks that are virtually frozen. As Ann mentioned, people have been told to shelter in place. And once they do go out, avoid crowds, which is pretty tricky on this day, which is a holiday every year.
It's pretty tricky in this area, Brian. This is the Back Bay of Boston. It is a popular area. It is a busy area on a normal day. It is chaotic here during the marathon in a good way because it's celebratory. The bars are open. People are out. Right now, there are people here. They want to see what's going on. I guess they're trying not to congregate, but for the most part, it's pretty quiet for this area. Right after the explosion, there were streams of people walking these streets. The subways were shut down, and because of that, people had to walk for miles in some cases to their destination. In fact, we're 2 blocks away from the finish line, 2 blocks from where those explosions happened. In fact, we saw one woman right over here. Witnesses saw her stumbling to this block with shrapnel wounds. NBC has confirmed that shrapnel was a part of these explosions. That's why there were so many lower limb injuries. Witnesses reported seeing tourniquets being applied on the raceway. Again, Back Bay is usually a very busy area. The streets are closed right now. There are a number of roadblocks throughout the area. There was a ground stop at Logan Airport. We had to circle over Providence for quite a while before they allowed us to land. And of course, Brian, as you would imagine, a very heavy police presence out here. The National Guard is here. And again, people are they're on alert. They want to know what's going on. The police commissioner has asked everybody to stay inside, everybody to go home if they can. And from what you can tell, although there are people out here, most of them have heeded that order, at least around here. Brian.
And Katie, we can see looking at tape of the finish line, the digital seems to say this was the 4:09, 4-hour, 9-minute finishing mark. Again, if you're crossing the finish line at that point in this race, you've done very well to finish it all. You've done very well. But people thought, and you can't blame them for this, that this was some kind of a cannon, some kind of planned thing. And I had one eyewitness today describe it in terms of world trade, that once the second building was hit that day, we knew it was something different. Well, to him, once the secondary explosion went off, they knew it was not an accident of the construction of the city like a gas main.
Certainly, when you're at a marathon, especially up here in Boston, where they haven't had issues like they've had in New York, nobody was expecting something like this to happen. So initially, nobody thought they weren't sure if it wasn't an accident, if it wasn't a gas main break. People didn't know what was going on. But once that second explosion happened about 15 seconds later, people started to believe that there was something fishy going on, something bad. And that's when people started to get a little bit scared, started to run away. A bit of a chaotic scene out here. Brian.
Katie Tur on the streets of Boston tonight, where for a 15-block area, no one's been allowed. We don't know when people will be allowed back in. Katie, thanks. To Washington we go. Our justice correspondent, Pete Williams, has been working this story all day. Pete, what can you tell us tonight?
Well, Brian, tonight authorities confirmed that there were 2 bombs. We know that much, but it's unclear how many others were planted. They say there were other suspicious packages. And the word, of course, of another bomb elsewhere placed at the JFK library is apparently turning out not to be true. But at least 5 other packages have been found on the street, have been deemed suspicious, and are being destroyed. But there is no firm confirmation of whether they were actually explosive devices, although some officials tonight say there is reason to think that some of them were. We're told, by the way, that one of the 2 victims that was killed in the explosion was 8 years old. Boston police say there was no specific intelligence warning of any kind of attack, and federal officials tonight say there is no reason to think that this is part of any larger threat. At this point, they believe it is confined to Boston, but a meeting tonight will decide whether any kind of national alert will be sent out. There is no suspect in custody, authorities say, but some people are being questioned, including some with injuries who were taken to Boston hospitals. One of those, a person in whom there is some interest, is a young person who was here on a student visa. Brian?
All right, Pete Williams in our Washington newsroom. We'll be looking for further details from there. Pete, thanks. Michael Leiter is our national security analyst at NBC News. He's the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center in Washington. Michael, 2 things to at least overseas veterans of our dual wars these past 10 years and all those of us who have spent time over there. Number 1, the primary explosion, then the secondary explosion as people are running to the first. And number 2, the nature of these injuries, an explosive device apparently with added shrapnel, and that kind of haunts everybody involved.
Yes, Brian. The idea of using 2 explosive devices, the first charge, which attracts to some extent